Hi guys, I'm MK Doka, and the poem I chose to do was To His Coy Mistress by Andrew Marvell. It was published in 1681 after his death. So I'm going to start out by reading the poem to you. Had we but whirled enough in time, this coyness lady were no crime. We would sit down and think which way to walk and pass our long love's day. Thou by the Indian gang's side should rubies find, I by the tide of humor would complain. I would love you 10 years before the flood, and you should, if you please, refuse till the conversion of the Jews. My vegetable love should grow vaster than empires and more slow, and 100 years should go to praise thine eyes and on thy forehead gaze. 200 to adore each breast, but 30,000 to the rest. An age at least to every part, and the last age should show your heart. For, lady, you deserve this state, nor would I love at lower rate. But at my back I always hear Time's winged chariot hurrying near, and yonder all before us lie deserts of vast eternity. Thy beauty shall no more be found, nor in thy marble vault shall sound my echoing song. Then worms shall try that long preserved virginity, and your quaint honor turn to dust, and into ashes all my lust. Their graves a fine and private place, but none, I think, do they embrace. Now therefore, while the youthful hue sits on thy skin like morning dew, and while thy willing soul transpires at every pore with instant fires, and let us sport us while we may, and now like amorous birds of prey, whether at once our time devour, then languish in his slow chapped power. Let us roll all our strength and all our sweetness up into one ball, and tear our pleasures with rough strife through the iron gates of life. Thus, though we cannot make our sun stand still, yet we will make him run. I hope you guys were noticing the rhyme scheme and all the stuff in the poem as I was reading it. That's always something that you should be listening for when you're reading a new poem. But you guys have already read this poem. Andrew Marvell was a well-known poet. He was born in 1621 and he died in 1678, so he did not live terribly long. But he lived his whole life in England. His other poems include The Garden, Flecknoe, and The Character of Holland. He didn't write just poetry, he also wrote prose. And then this poem, which is like a romantic / comedic poem, I think it's more of a comedic poem than romantic poem. But he also wrote political stuff, and he wrote, like, The Garden was about a farm, so he wrote about, like, scenery and stuff too. And he was like I said, he was a well-known poet of his time. He has a lot of works, and his other stuff is pretty interesting, but I think that this poem is what he's most well-known for. About the poem is a comedic one, and it's about a man who's obviously trying to sleep with a woman. One interesting thing about this poem is the title of it, To His Coy Mistress. The word coy is often studied when discussing this poem, because the word coy has two different meanings. One is kind of like a woman who's like being alluring and kind of shy, and then another one who is just like shy and like reserved and just kind of, get away from me. And I think the latter is what describes the woman of this poem, is I don't think that she wants anything to do with him. With that being said, one thing that's often brought up with this poem is, like, do you guys think that he would be successful? Like, if this poem was read to you and you're a female, would you be like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, let's do it? Or would you be like, oh, maybe not? I think that's something to think about, and as I analyze this poem, that's something that you guys can think about too. So let's start with the first 10 lines. Technically, the first stanza is about 20 lines, but I like to divide it into 2 lines, just because I think that the stanza can be kind of divided by 2 different subjects. So, had we but whirled enough in time, this coyness lady were no time. So what he's saying here is basically, if we had all the time in the world, you could be as coy as you wanted to be. None of that would really matter. We would sit down and think which way to walk and pass our long love's day. So he's saying that we would do all the things that coupley things do. We would look at the clouds. We would go on strolls. We would go on bike rides. I don't even know if they had bikes back then, but, he was saying that we would, hang out and we would talk. We would spend all our days talking and how in love we were. Thou by the Indian gang's side should rubies find. So I don't know if you guys know what the Ganges River is, but it's kind of like a holy river, and I guess that there are rubies around there. I think at this time when the poem was written, it was like really, really beautiful and like a pure thing. And he talks about her purity and her virtue later. But now it's kind of polluted. But I mean, the imagery's still there. I by the tide of humor would complain, I would love you 10 years before the flood. And you should, if you please, refuse till the conversion of the Jews. So this is kind of a biblical allusion here. He's talking about Noah's flood. And he's saying that, you know, Noah's flood happened in the Old Testament. And then it happened long before Jesus even came. So before Jews would be converted. So he's saying you could refuse me for that amount of time and that would be completely fine. He's basically saying that, like, you know, time really doesn't matter. So we could play this game all day long. So that's part of the first. That's the first part of the first stanza. The second part of the first stanza is, my vegetable love should grow faster than empires and more slaves. So he's has like a love garden essentially, and you know, heard the saying Rome wasn't built in the day. Well, he's saying that his love would be bigger than the Roman Empire, and it would be built more slowly than that. So he would spend more time cultivating that. 100 years should go to praise thine eyes, and on thy forehead gaze. 200 to adore each breast, but 30,000 to the rest. So he would spend 100 years complimenting her eyes, which, I don't know, that would get kind of old, I feel like. And 200 to adore each breast. So he would, you know, literally go through every part of her body and spend years complimenting her. He said 30,000 years to the rest of your body. And an age at least to every part, and the last age should show your heart. Well, when you're first reading this poem, you're like, oh, it's kind of sweet. Like, you know, he's complimenting her heart. But the more I read into this, I realized that that was kind of more of a thing about her virginity. And that it just kind of like goes back to him wanting to be in bed with her. And then he says, for lady, you deserve this state, nor would I love at lower rates. So he's basically saying if I had all the time in the world, I would give you all the love that you deserve. Because you deserve nothing but that. Now, is that true? I don't know. He probably just wants to get in bed with her. And he's saying, to me, it seems like he's saying whatever it takes to do that. So then the next stanza, which is my favorite stanza, it's kind of like the funny but morbid stanza. But at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near. So for this stanza, he's saying that time is fleeting and that it's always kind of creeping up on you. And wonder all before us lie deserts of vast eternity. So basically everyone's going to die, and that's all we have to look forward to. Thy beauty shall no more be found, nor in thy marble vault shall sound my echoing song. So he's saying that her beauty is no good if she is dead. No one can admire her beauty, but he is well and alive and is more than happy to admire her beauty. And he's also kind of building himself up by saying, well, this lovely thing I'm writing you, this poem, cannot be heard to the dead. So he's like, well, I'm such a good poet, you know, my song's no good to the dead, you deserve to hear it. This next part's kind of weird. Then worms shall try that long preserved virginity, and your quaint honor turn to dust and ashes, and into ashes all my lust. So basically he's saying that the worms can't take your virginity, I might as well take your virginity. It's no good to the worms, but it's good to me. The grave's a fine and private place, but none I think do their embrace. So basically, you know, you're going to spend the rest of your life in a grave, but no one can really cuddle in a grave or do humanly things in a grave. So after that, he kind of calms down a little bit after reminding her of her mortality. But he's basically saying in that stanza, we're going to die anyway. Why are you trying to be so virtuous? None of that matters when you're dead. No one's going to care if you're a virgin when you're dead. Like, you'll be dead. It's very much carpe diem, seize the day type stuff. And I think we talked about that in our discussion post. And the last line, the last stanza, goes, now therefore, while the youthful hue sits on my skin like morning dew. So he's calmed down a little bit, and he's like, well, we are alive. We are young. We might as well do this. And this stanza is actually really cool because he kind of takes the concept of time pursuing you and he kind of flips it. So, and the next line goes, and while thy willing soul transpires at every pore with instant fires, now let us sport us while we may, and now like amorous birds of prey, rather at once our time devour than languish in his slow chat power. So time, I would argue, would be a character in this poem, and he's kind of an evil character. And so he's basically saying, like, like our souls are important, all that stuff's important, but what I'm trying to do with you doesn't involve your soul, it just kind of involves your body. And he uses amorous birds of prey, and like he uses words like devour and words like that, and you're just kind of like, oh, okay. Like, you just remind me I was gonna die. Let us roll all our strength and all our sweetness up into one ball. That's a very like physical thing, I feel like. And tear our pleasures with rough strife through the iron gates of lies. Thus, though we cannot make our sun stand still, yet we will make him run. So the ending of this poem, he does something really cool. Like I said, he kind of flips the concept of time, and he mentions making the sun stand still. Back in his days, they thought that the sun revolved around the earth and not the earth revolving around the sun. So they thought that the sun controlled the time, but we know that's not the case. But I mean, it can still stand through to today, that concept of, having time pursue them instead of having them pursue time instead of time pursuing them, which I think is probably his strongest argument in this thing. I thought that was pretty clever of him. So this poem is 3 stanzas, but I broke it up into 4 different things just to make studying it a little bit easier. Just to sum up the whole thing in general, the first stanza is basically saying how if they had all the time in the world, he would admire every inch of her. They could play the game of can I get her all the time. They would spend years doing that. The second stanza is reminding her of death, that she will die and that it's no good being virtuous and that they should just kind of seize the day. And then the last stanza is basically him begging her to make love to him. I mentioned the rhyme scheme. It follows a steady AABB rhyme scheme. Although there's some examples of slant rhyme, although I said he was an English poet. So, they might not have been stanzas. Like he, rhymes flood with wood and eternity and lie. So I would kind of consider those slant, but also I live in East Tennessee, so they might not be technically slant rhymes. But I'm going to upload my notes to the page so you guys will be able to look at them and see my analysis of it. And thank you for listening.